Long ago, before farms covered the valleys and before corn became the heart of Aztec life, humanity faced a very serious problem. People were hungry, very hungry. The gods had created humans, but they had forgotten one small detail: food. Well, not exactly forgotten. The greatest food in the world already existed. Golden corn grew in abundance, but it was hidden deep inside a massive mountain called Tonacatepetl, the mountain of sustenance. Behind its stone walls lay endless kernels of maize, enough to feed every person on Earth. There was just one problem. No human could get to it. The mountain was sealed shut. The people searched for food everywhere. They gathered roots, berries, and whatever scraps they could find, but nothing compared to the precious corn hidden inside the mountain. The gods themselves debated how to solve the problem. Some suggested using enormous strength. Others proposed powerful magic. Yet despite all their divine power, no one could figure out how to reach the corn. Then one god noticed something very unusual. Tiny ants were marching across the ground, carrying kernels of corn on their backs. Somehow, these little insects had found a way into the mountain when even the gods could not.
The discovery left the gods completely baffled. Imagine being an all-powerful deity capable of creating storms, moving stars, and shaping mountains, only to be outsmarted by an insect the size of a grain of rice. The gods watched carefully as the ants marched in neat little lines, each carrying precious kernels of corn. They followed the trail all the way to the foot of Tonacatepetl. There, the ants disappeared into a crack so tiny that even a finger could not fit inside. The gods argued about what to do next. One suggested smashing the mountain apart. Another suggested creating a giant magical drill. A third spent most of the meeting pointing out why everyone else's ideas were terrible. Finally, the clever god Quetzalcoatl stepped forward. Unlike many gods, Quetzalcoatl preferred brains over brawn. If the ants could enter the mountain, perhaps the answer wasn't becoming stronger. Perhaps the answer was becoming smaller. The Feathered Serpent God stared at the tiny crack and smiled. He had a plan. It was unusual, it was risky, and it involved turning himself into an ant.
Now imagine you're Quetzalcoatl. You're one of the most respected gods in the Aztec world. People pray to you, temples are built in your honor, and your next brilliant strategy is to become an ant and follow another ant into a hole. Yep, that is exactly what he did. With a flash of divine magic, the mighty feathered serpent shrank down smaller and smaller until he stood on 6 tiny legs. Suddenly, the world looked completely different. Pebbles became boulders. Grass towers stretched like forests into the sky. Even a puddle looked large enough to launch a boat. Nearby stood a red ant carrying a kernel of corn. Quetzalcoatl approached and politely asked where the corn came from. The ant looked at him suspiciously. After all, strangers asking questions about secret food supplies is rarely a good sign. But eventually the ant agreed to help. Together they marched toward the crack in the mountain. Deep inside the darkness, Quetzalcoatl prepared for a journey no god had ever attempted. He was about to enter the hidden kingdom of corn.
The crack in the mountain twisted and turned like an endless maze. For an ant, the journey was difficult. For a god pretending to be an ant, it was even harder. Quetzalcoatl squeezed through narrow tunnels, climbed steep walls, and crawled beneath jagged rocks. Several times he nearly lost sight of his guide. The deeper they traveled, the stranger the mountain became. Glittering crystals sparkled in the darkness. Underground rivers echoed through the stone corridors. At one point, Quetzalcoatl found himself staring at a centipede so enormous it looked like a dragon. He wisely decided not to introduce himself. The little ant continued marching forward without fear. To her, this was simply another day at work.
Eventually, a warm golden glow appeared ahead. The air smelled sweet and fresh. As they rounded the final corner, Quetzalcoatl froze in amazement. Before him stretched a hidden paradise. Vast stores of golden corn filled enormous chambers carved into the heart of the mountain. Humanity's future was sitting right there, hidden in plain sight.
For a moment, Quetzalcoatl simply stared. There was enough corn here to feed generations. Mountains of maize rose higher than houses. Golden kernels covered the ground like treasure. To the ants, this was an ordinary food supply. To humanity, it was salvation. The god carefully examined the chambers and finally understood why no one had discovered the secret. The mountain wasn't protected by monsters or magical traps. It was protected by size. The entrance was so small that only creatures like ants could pass through. No giant warrior could force his way inside. No powerful god could simply walk in. The solution had never required strength. It required humility. The ants had succeeded because they were willing to go where larger beings could not. Quetzalcoatl couldn't help but laugh at the irony. The gods had spent ages searching for grand solutions, while tiny insects quietly carried corn back and forth the entire time. Sometimes the greatest secret in the world is hidden right under your nose.
Now came the most important part of the mission. Quetzalcoatl needed proof. He carefully lifted a kernel of corn onto his tiny back. For an ant, this was perfectly normal. For a god disguised as an ant, it was surprisingly difficult. The kernel felt enormous. He staggered. He slipped. At one point, he nearly rolled backward down a tunnel. The ant guide probably wondered how this newcomer had survived 5 minutes in ant society. But eventually, they reached the crack leading outside. Step by step, Quetzalcoatl emerged from the mountain carrying the precious prize. The waiting gods watched in astonishment. Their mighty companion had disappeared into a crack and returned carrying exactly what humanity needed. With a flash of divine light, Quetzalcoatl transformed back into his true form. Suddenly, a giant feathered serpent stood before them, proudly holding a single kernel of corn. It wasn't much to look at, yet that tiny kernel represented hope, survival, and the future of civilization itself. The gods celebrated the discovery, but a new problem quickly appeared. One kernel of corn was wonderful. A mountain full of corn was even better. Humanity needed access to all of it. Once again, the gods gathered to discuss solutions. Predictably, the conversation returned to smashing things. This time, however, they actually had a target. If they could break open Tonacatepetl, everyone could share the food hidden inside. The challenge was that the mountain was unbelievably strong. It had resisted countless attempts to crack its stone walls. Even divine power struggled against it. Eventually, the gods turned to one of the most powerful forces in existence, Nanahuatzin, a humble but courageous deity associated with transformation and sacrifice. If anyone could break the mountain, it would be him. The plan was dangerous. It involved thunder, lightning, and enough raw power to shake the earth itself. Humanity waited anxiously while the gods prepared to challenge the mountain that had guarded its secret for so long.
Then came the moment that changed everything. Thunder rolled across the sky. Lightning flashed over the land. The gods unleashed their power against Tonacatepetl. The mountain trembled. Massive cracks spread across its surface. Stone shattered. Great chunks of rock crashed down the slopes. Finally, with a roar that echoed across the world, the mountain broke open. Golden corn spilled from the hidden chambers. Maize scattered across the valleys and plains below. Humanity rushed forward in amazement. For the first time, people could plant corn, harvest it, and feed their families. Villages grew stronger. Communities flourished. fields of green and gold began spreading across the landscape. What had once been a secret treasure hidden underground became the foundation of an entire civilization. And it all happened because one tiny ant revealed a path that nobody else could see. Not a giant warrior, not a mighty king, not even the gods themselves. The smallest creature had pointed the way. As the years passed, corn became far more than food. It became life itself. In many Aztec traditions, humans were said to be closely connected to maize. Corn fed the people, sustained their cities, and supported their culture. Every harvest carried a reminder of the ancient adventure hidden behind its origins. Somewhere in the distant past, an ant had unknowingly changed the fate of the world. That idea carried an important lesson. The myth wasn't really about size. It was about perspective. The gods saw obstacles. The ant saw a doorway. The gods looked for overwhelming force. The ant simply kept moving forward, one step at a time. History often celebrates the biggest heroes, the strongest warriors, and the loudest leaders. Yet this story suggests that greatness can arrive in very small packages. Sometimes the individual who changes everything isn't standing on a throne. Sometimes they're carrying a grain of corn through a crack in a rock.
So the next time you see an ant marching determinedly across the ground, remember this ancient Aztec tale. According to legend, one tiny insect helped bring humanity its most precious food. A god may have carried the corn back to the world, and powerful deities may have broken open the mountain, but none of it would have happened without the ant. The smallest hero started the entire chain of events. It is a wonderfully funny image when you think about it. The fate of civilization hanging on an insect that probably had no idea it was changing history. Yet that is exactly why the story has endured for centuries. It reminds us that wisdom can come from unexpected places. Solutions can hide in plain sight. And being small does not mean being unimportant. In the end, the mountain of sustenance was defeated not by strength alone, but by curiosity, humility, and a tiny guide willing to show the way. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson hidden inside the kernel of this remarkable myth.